Well, hello there, friends and family. Taking a couple of days off to enjoy the Labor Day weekend. But I thought I'd talk to you about something that's extremely important, not only to myself, but my kids, my family, and friends. And I think it's important to all of y'all out there as well. And that is how and why I prepare. Or some may call it now, in modern day times, prep. I'm not too fond of that particular name, preppers and that, because it does have some negative connotation to it. But I've always had a preparedness mindset, you might say. And part of that comes from my parents, who were raised up during an extremely hard and trying time in American history. And that was the Great Depression. They were born in the Great Depression. And they spent their first years as children during that trying time. And it would have an impact on their life for the remainder of it, as it would my grandparents, my great-grandparents. It was because of that trying time where there were no jobs, and there wasn't much money, and therefore there were problems acquiring food, especially for those who did not have any land, couldn't grow their own. Unfortunately, back then, the greater portion of the population of America was rural. It wasn't urban and in cities like it is now. And the same was so with my parents' parents and their grandparents at the time. My grandparents lived on a farm. My grandparents had a farm, but had moved to Bradford, Pennsylvania. And my grandfather had found work at the refinery there, the Kendall Refinery in Bradford, Pennsylvania, to be exact. But during that time, even though they didn't have a mortgage, they owned their house because they built it as they could, and they didn't have the land they once had with a farm. They had an ample lot, and they did have gardens. In fact, pretty much every piece of ground they could dig up, plow up, and plant, they did. And it was because of that one reason they survived fairly well. They had ample food. But what they learned during that period of their childhood and the aftermath of it, like I say, that period of time would stick with them for the remainder of their lives. They always had the mindset to be prepared for the eventuality that something could happen that would jeopardize their ability to provide food. That a job and money was not always a means to being able to provide for your family. My father and mother knew that jobs come and go. Now my father, he was in the U.S. Army, and that was stable. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, which was pretty much the way it was back in those times. Now she'd worked prior to their marriage in a drugstore. Once my mother and father got married, she never worked again. Now she did work. She raised us, kept a nice clean home, prepared the food every day. She probably worked harder as a mother than she ever worked at the drugstore. And that being said, I just don't want to diminish her role in all of this. But based on the hardships they faced back during the Great Depression, they always made sure there's one thing we'd always have. We'd always have food. And we did that by gardening. And we always had, from the very first time My father had enough land to put a garden in. We had one. And we planted it. We made sure we just didn't plant one time, but as soon as the crop finished, we'd put in another crop. And we'd plant successionally all throughout the year till frost came. We'd even have cold frames. And we would grow certain vegetables such as radishes, lettuce, turnips, and other things in cold frames during the early winter and throughout the winter. Such things like carrots as well. But because of the teachings and how we lived life when I was a child and through my youth, that was the basis of the foundation for me always being prepared. That wasn't all of it. There would become a time in my life, in my teen years, that would forever change my outlook on why a person should always be prepared. Now granted, when I was younger, I was like most kids. I complained about having chores, and I had plenty. I had chores before I went to school. I had chores after I got home, most times all the way to dark. In the garden, as well as on the farms. There's always something to do in the gardens. There's always something to do on the farms. And many times, I really hated it. Because I could look around and see other children in my neighborhood and area that didn't have those things to do. They were out camping, hunting, biking, hiking, whatever. So I sort of held my parents in disdain for that. But that would all change, like I said, one night. And that night would be April the 3rd of 1974. Just days away from my 18th birthday. And to what is now known by many as the Night of Terror. It would be the single largest outbreak of tornadoes ever in the southeast of America. I'm not sure how many came. You can use Mr. Google and look it up. But for where we lived at the time, which was Harvest, Alabama, which is in North Alabama, it would be a night that would change my life and my outlook for the remainder of it. Because on that night in Harvest, the first tornado to come through would be shortly after dusk. And it would be later classified as an EF5 tornado, which is the largest tornado category. It came from the southwest up into our neighborhood, which was Highland. And our neighborhood consisted of two streets, East Highlander Avenue or Street, and West Highland. The EF5 would literally run down West Highland Street. Now we saw it coming, and my mom and dad got us all in the car, and we ran. We ran to a nearby underpass and hid under it. What we didn't know is all of our neighbors on West Highland Street, all their houses, all their property would be not only totally destroyed, but totally gone. We would return after it passed, and we would start helping in the rescue and recovery efforts that evening. But what I want to let y'all know, there was nothing left. That EF5 tornado took the pavement off the road. There's nothing left. Blank foundations and cinder blocks where houses once stood. Our street, East Highland, was fairly well untouched. Yep, there was some roof damage, small outbuilding damage. We had lost our equipment shed, which was on the far west of our property, closest to West Highland. Other than that, our house and other outbuildings had come through it unscathed. It wouldn't remain that way. For within an hour or two, I'm not sure when, another tornado would come down the same track as the first, except slightly to the east, more aimed at our home and our neighbors' homes on East Highland. And we went to run again. And I stood at the front door with my hand on the doorknob, holding my baby sister Becky. My parents, my brothers and sisters, Kathy and Randy, were at the back door. The plan was to run to the car again and try to run from it. We wouldn't have the time. For all of a sudden, while the door handle was still in my hand, the front door blew off, blowing myself, holding my little sister Becky, out into the front yard. I didn't know what happened to my parents and my brother and sisters at the time. I had no clue. But there I was, laying in the mud, looking down below the hill. We lived on top of the hill. Here came the tornado, straight at me. No place to run, no place to hide. And all I could think to do was, we had silver maples out in the front yard, and they have a lot of air roots that run across the top of the ground. So I frantically dug in the mud till I could wrap my hands around those roots with my sister underneath me, and I held on for dear life until that tornado passed. And yep, I was cut up by debris. Not too bad. And here again, it was pitch black. Couldn't see, couldn't hear, nothing but the roar. And when people say it sounds like a freight train coming through, oh yeah, it sounds like a freight train coming right through your house, wide open. In my mind, even though I never looked back, I just kept staring into the mud, I thought the house and everything we owned were gone. When it passed, I'd get up with my sister, make sure she was okay, and I'd find my parents, who had indeed made it to the car and sought shelter there. And by just an act of God, the tornado had not taken the car away. Now, my parents did say later that the car had been lifted up several feet, but once the tornado passed, it was let back down. We would find our house was moved off the foundation. The roof was damaged, but otherwise the structure was intact. All our other outbuildings, tractor sheds, garage, and the remainder of the buildings on the property, they were gone. And so were most of the houses on that street that night. And once we got collected and got back into the house, even though it was sitting cattywampus off the foundation, my mom, my younger brother Randy, and sister Kathy, and of course baby Becky, we left them in there while Dad and I went out again to see what we could do to help our neighbors. And we did all we could. Many people died that night in our neighborhood. Countless more were injured. And hundreds of homes were either destroyed or damaged. It was the aftermath of all of this that would provide more pain than I'd saw my entire lifetime up to that point. We'd not had power restored for over 8 weeks. Yeah, at that time we had freezers, we had a refrigerator, we had air conditioning, no power. But here comes in the fact of what my parents did. See, they were always prepared. My father, not too earlier, had bought an old Army surplus generator, multi-fuel, could run off gas or diesel. We had it. And for whatever reason, even though my mother hated it and I wasn't too fond of it, we had 300 gallons of gas in 55-gallon drums stockpiled for that very reason. That had somehow made it through the storms. So because of the gas, we were able to power our fridge and freezer until power was restored. We had canned food. We had dried food. We still had a warm, dry place. Yep, we had tarp up the roofs. Back then it was canvas tarps. But we were dry, fairly warm. We had power. That would not be the case for hundreds and hundreds of my neighbors, friends, and their families. It was that one night that drove it into my mind that their wisdom of always being prepared was the right way to live. And now I'm going to show you some pictures of that night. What was left of my neighborhood after the storm subsided the next morning. So let's go take a look. So y'all, here we are, we're back sitting in front of my computer desk. And what we're looking at right now is the National Weather Service website. And as you can see, this is April the 3rd through the 4th, 1974, Madison County damage pictures. Now I would like to say that I personally have pictures of this time, or that my parents took pictures. That's not the case. During that time in my life and in theirs, taking pictures was not something we even thought about. For the initial days that would come and weeks afterwards, pictures were the furthest thing from our minds. Surviving with what we had left, helping our neighbors as much as we could, which would include feeding them with what we had, we'd share, as well as those who still had homes and fridges and freezers. We'd also take a generator to them and recharge their freezers so they wouldn't lose everything they had. This would go on for weeks and weeks after until power was restored. But let's go on down here and take a look at my neighborhood. What was left of it the next day. Here in this picture, you can plainly see what the first EF5 tornado left behind. Like I told you, there was nothing left but blank foundations and cinder blocks. The first tornado was classified as an EF5. The second tornado is an EF4. Here's another picture. Some of this structure is still standing. The outer walls are gone, as is the roof. Here, you can plainly see right here is the bathroom. I guess that's why they tell you, if you don't have a storm shelter underground, seek centermost room in your house, which a lot of times is the bathroom. And as you can see here, The only thing left was the bathroom. And this is a house that was actually in my neighborhood. And I remember this photo. It's sort of an iconic photo used many times of a bathtub that was impaled into the ground. And you can see there the bell-bottom blue jeans, which were all the thing during that time period. Here again, the only thing left was some cinder blocks and the concrete foundation of this home. Here, the same result, nothing but cinder blocks. Here you can see what once was a home. Nothing left but some lumber. The house down below it, totally gone as well. Now I remember this picture because I stood looking at this same site. Granted, I was only 17 years old. And like I say, I'd become 18 on April 18th of that year. But this one image, as well as many others, stands out in my mind of just what was left that fateful day. And the last here is just another picture. Now I sorely wish I did have personal pictures to share. But like I said, that wasn't our greatest concern during this time. Our greatest concern was surviving it, getting through it, helping our neighbors, family, and taking care of ourselves. And this was in a time period in America, folks, when FEMA didn't come. Now in time, American Red Cross would show up, church groups would show up, and other groups. And one group I cannot praise more is the Mennonites. They came and they helped rebuild homes, repair homes, cook food. They came by the hundreds. I'm not sure from where, some from Tennessee and other parts. But we didn't have a government agency that showed up. Not like we do today. For the most part, Alabama and many of the states that were affected by this night were left to fend on their own and do with what they had. And this, folks, this one night in my life is why, from that day forward, I knew I should always be prepared. And I always have been, to the best of my ability. Not only with food, but I also have a generator. A small gas one. It's not large enough to carry the whole house, but like the one my father had during this time period, it'll carry the refrigerator, the freezer, and keep the lights on. That is, if the house survives. Because the one thing we here in the Southeast have to always be prepared for is tornadoes. And they come every year. They strike at random. You're never going to know when or where. And we hope and pray for the best. Another thing we prepare for, especially for those of us who live closer to the coastline in the Gulf of Mexico, is hurricanes. Because in the recent past, even though I live 150 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, there have been times when hurricanes have come straight up center of Alabama, still held together, and still hit where I live here in Tallahassee, Alabama, with hurricane strength winds. And it was during those hurricanes, me being prepared with ample food, water, a generator, gas to run it, tarps, medical supplies, and what have you, has afforded me and my family to survive what would have been extremely difficult and trying times. And that's the point to the video. You gotta be prepared, folks, kids, friends and family, for in the event, not because of a worldwide apocalypse or a national financial collapse, meteor strike, things of that nature, you have to be prepared for a personal life impact. At many times, that personal crisis is going to be regional. It's going to affect a smaller area where the whole country doesn't feel it. And at times it may just be your neighborhood, your local area. Or, as in 1974, more widespread, such as the night the largest tornado outbreak happened, 11 different states. I think it was 134 or 144 tornadoes, if I remember correctly. Vast area of this country devastated. My point, it can happen at any time. And you can take the mindset to do nothing. You can say, well, God will care for me. This is how I feel about that. God gave us the brains, the knowledge, and the tools to prepare for ourselves. I'd like to think he'd like to see us take some of those steps first, than always just waiting on him. And I could be wrong in that. And that don't mean during trying times of my life, such as this one in 1974, I wasn't praying. Because I'd be a liar if I told you different. Because on this particular night in my life, as many others that would come, oh, I was praying all right. And I was praying for God's forgiveness for anything I had done. And I was praying for survive and be given one more chance. And I've tried not to let him down. So y'all, friends and family, as you can see, and that's why I prepare. Not only was it my upbringing, but it was that one night when I was young. But it wouldn't stop there. Such as job loss and living through 2 hurricanes would strengthen my convictions to always be prepared, to have ample food, water, a generator, fuel to run the generator, tarps, medical supplies, and other things on hand at all times. And at times I'm probably like many of y'all. Friends make fun of me. They say I'm a doomsday prepper, always looking for the worst instead of the best. I don't see it that way. I remember those times in my life, 1974, 1995 when Opal came through. In fact, the very house I live in right now suffered roof damage from Opal. Because here in Tallahassee, we saw hurricane force winds And many, 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 many houses had roofs damaged. We didn't lose any structures per se. But on top of all that, there was flooding. There were thousands upon thousands, literally hundreds of thousands of trees that were laid over. And you can still go this very day to some of those areas. You can still see the aftermath of Opal. And that was in 1995. Later, Ivan would come through. Nowhere near as strong, but here again, we still sustain damage. Mostly from trees. The purpose of the video is, you should always be prepared for whatever happens in your life. It could be a job loss. Think about that. You could lose your job tomorrow. Do you have enough in your house right now to eat till you can get assistance? Till you can get unemployment going, even if you could? Do you have the money put back to pay your everyday monthly bills? Think about that. And then, like always, there's always that chance that a natural disaster is going to come your way. And right now, as I'm recording this, a catastrophic natural disaster has just finished up in the Bahamas. And that's Dorian. Catastrophic. Cat 5 hurricane. That, from what I'm seeing this morning, has virtually, totally, and utterly destroyed the Bahamas. I do hope all of us are praying for those poor people in the Bahamas, and for anybody else that stands in the path of Dorian. I hope you'll take a moment in your life and take a look at those pictures that are being put online and social media and videos, and understand, depending on where you live, that can happen to you. This video will start a new series of videos. In that series, we're going to be looking at how you can prevent a personal, life-changing event in your life. Whether that's loss of a job, a freak weather event, a natural disaster, or one of cosmic origin. Or maybe it's a financial collapse of our nation or war. We're going to be looking at what we all need to be doing, from the basics to the more advanced. And I'll be looking at each category. From food, to water, to shelter, to your finances, and so on. So I hope you all watch this video series and bear everything I have said in mind. And folks, until I see y'all on the next video, as always, I want to wish that each of you take care, stay safe out there, and God bless you all. Till next we see each other. Goodbye for now.